Okay, so picture this. A teenager opens his own medical practice. I'm talking a staff, a website, the whole deal. He even calls himself Dr. Love. But here's the thing. He wasn't some child prodigy. He was a child fraudster, and his absolutely bizarre story might just shine a light on a hidden trend in modern crime.
It sounds like the plot of a movie, right? I mean, just imagine walking into a clinic for a checkup, and the person standing there in a white coat is barely old enough to drive. It seems totally impossible, but for a few people in Florida, it was very, very real.
So here he is. This is Malachi Love-Robinson. At an age when most of us were stressing about high school exams, he was busy building a criminal career based on one of the most audacious deceptions you can possibly imagine, pretending to be a medical doctor.
To really understand the bigger picture here, we first have to wrap our heads around the sheer boldness of his case. I mean, this story goes way, way beyond just a simple prank.
His career in deception started shockingly early. In 2015, he was just found wandering around a hospital in a doctor's coat. But by the very next year, at just 18 years old, he had escalated to opening his own medical office. That's where he was finally arrested for treating an undercover officer. And even after serving prison time, he was sentenced again for a completely new fraud scheme. So you see, this wasn't just some youthful mistake. It was a clear, escalating pattern of behavior.
Now, it's really easy to just dismiss this as a totally bizarre one-in-a-million story. But criminologists are starting to ask a really fascinating question. What if Dr. Love isn't an outlier at all, but an extreme example of a new, emerging category of youth crime?
For decades, when we thought of a juvenile delinquent, we probably pictured someone involved in things like theft or vandalism or assault. Conventional, often physical crimes. But what if technology and our changing world are actually creating a whole new type of young offender?
Well, it turns out there's a name for it. A 2017 study put a label on these kinds of technology-enabled, deception-based offenses. Juvenile hybrid white-collar delinquency. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, I know. But it describes a very, very modern kind of crime. And this definition is really the key, because it focuses on the how, not the who. See, this isn't about social status or having a corner office. It's about crime committed through deception and concealment instead of brute force, using guile to get money or property, something a teenager can now do entirely from their bedroom. We're talking about crimes that are becoming more and more accessible to young people. Passing bad checks, credit card fraud, identity theft. These things don't require any physical confrontation, but they do require a certain level of savvy and, well, deception.
But this is where the story takes a really sharp turn from what you might expect. Researchers dug into this massive data set from the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice to try and build a profile of these so-called hybrid delinquents.
You know the stereotype, right? The hacker or the young fraudster is some bored, middle-class kid just looking for a thrill. But that is not what the data shows. In fact, it's pretty much the exact opposite.
This one finding just completely flips the script. The study found that the kids committing these non-violent, deceptive crimes actually reported more trauma, abuse, and neglect than the kids committing conventional, street-level crimes.
I mean, the direct comparison is just startling. The hybrid offenders, the ones doing the fraud and digital crimes, they consistently show higher rates of trauma and mental health issues. They also tend to be a little bit older. This is not a profile of privilege, it's a profile of profound vulnerability.
And the specifics are, well, they're really sobering. According to the research, these young people are way more likely to have witnessed violence, suffered physical abuse and neglect, and been placed in the child welfare system. They also struggle more with anger, depression, and trauma. The researchers even suggest these crimes might just be a desperate way for them to try and take care of themselves.
Now, it's important to keep this in perspective. In this huge Florida data set, only about 1.7% of all young offenders had ever been arrested for a hybrid offense. So it's not an epidemic, but it is a distinct, measurable, and really deeply troubled subgroup that was basically invisible on the data before.
The gender dynamics here are also super revealing. While boys and men commit more crime overall, this study found that girls are involved in these hybrid crimes at a much higher rate, relatively speaking, than they are in conventional crimes. The thinking is that the non-confrontational, individual nature of these offenses might be a key factor.
So, okay, we've got a teen doctor, a new category of crime, and a completely counterintuitive profile of who's committing it. So, what does it all mean? And really, why should we even care?
Well, this all points to a fundamental shift. Our image of a delinquent is pretty outdated because technology has created all these new criminal opportunities. And not just for privileged kids, but for some of our most vulnerable youth. These nonviolent, tech-savvy crimes are deeply linked to childhood trauma, which suggests our justice system, which was built for street crime, may need a whole new playbook.
The case of Malachi Dr. Love-Robinson might seem like a circus sideshow, just a crazy headline. But this research suggests he might be a sign of a future where the lines between victim and perpetrator, between privilege and desperation, are far more blurred than we ever imagined. And that leaves us with a pretty critical question to think about.